G'day, Jim.
Oh, hi, Brian.
Hello there. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Yeah, well, a couple of useless inventions that spring to mind is the ejector seat on a helicopter.
Yes.
And the parachute that opens on impact. And they've been around for years. But look, what triggered me off was your comments about China. And earlier on you made some interesting comments too. But funnily enough, you're talking about the yuan being the currency for South Africa. There's at least 10 countries that China trades with, and I only got this email today. Somebody wrote to me. It's a PhD guy who does international analysis, and apparently the IMF published a paper that said within 4 years China would pass the US as the biggest producer on Earth. And that triggered off a couple of other people who circulated the email that I got, that said that the IMF hadn't taken the extra step of bringing the production to an intrinsic value.
Yeah.
In other words, if you use a currency to value the production, you can have a very big error depending on how the currency's been determined. So that if you bring them to the same value, like a motor car in China might sell for $10,000 and the same car in America sell for $20,000.
Yeah.
It's still worth the same amount of money if it's the same car. They did that correction. China has already passed the US. It's now the biggest on an intrinsic value, which is a much more substantial way to do things. China's the biggest economy on Earth. And it's only a matter of time before it is the dominant currency.
Can I just say there are at least two ways that someone on the sideline could judge an economy. If I have some widgets I wish to sell, I want to know, are the Chinese people likely to pay what I want for my widgets, or do I want the widgets manufactured somewhere, and I might decide the Chinese people don't have enough money as consumers to pay me what I feel I deserve for my widgets, but I would like them made there because they don't ask much for their labour, and that will be the cheapest place to make them. So those are two different judgments you can make about an economy depending on what you want from it.
Well, look, when I first started looking at this, I came from the private sector, but I was engaged by the public sector. And I just felt like a complete dummy because I was talking to these bureaucrats who were talking about exogenous and endogenous and things like this, which words not even in the dictionary. And I checked people out lately. You can go to a politician and ask him, what do you call Australia's income? And they don't know the word for it because any financial entity has income. If it's a person, you call it wages. If it's a company, you call it gross sales. What do you call it for a country? And I haven't met a politician who knows that unprompted. They know as soon as you tell them it's called exports.
Yeah.
That's the only income, in the literal sense, that comes in from outside.
But economists talk about gross domestic product. Even if you're not exporting, you have a GDP.
No, exports are taken into account in GDP.
Yeah, but even if you didn't have any exports, they'd still say the GDP is such and such.
Oh, yes, you don't have to have exports to have have production.
It's a measure of economic activity.
Well, it's
not of the profitability of the whole corporation.
Actually, it's not just that. You can have activity without production. For instance, theft doesn't produce anything, but it requires activity. Actually, you're hitting on the most fundamental part of what's causing the world's problems, that these things that you and I have just spontaneously started to talk about are right at the heart of why Greece went broke, why Australia's got so much foreign debt, and it's just that evolution in economics has not been sufficient to keep up with monetary greed and the genius of banks and lawyers and people and public servants to get money for nothing. Not to create money out of thin air, but to get wealth for nothing without adding to the production. Production actually can only come from work, and it must have intrinsic value, either as goods or services. You can have activity that does not produce wealth, and as I said, theft is one, and you were talking about drugs and things that are addictive, and that is something that came up in that fundamental analysis that we did years ago, because the ABS gave us a list of the workforce cut down into every component, like banking and insurance and agriculture, so on. They had a whole list of them in alphabetical order. When we got to the end of it, we found there were two things we hadn't looked at: crime and religion. Don't ask me why it was only those two, but that did bring a bit of a laugh.
Well, they're two aspects of the black market, I suppose.
Well, the ABS just doesn't have them segregated.
Religion doesn't make a profit because they don't have to pay tax. So it's a permitted black market, and crime is a black market by definition, isn't it?
Well, I think we were able to attach quite a lot of goodness and production to religion, even if you disagreed with the religion itself. I mean, the private schools in Australia build capital brilliantly, and they do other good things. But crime we couldn't attribute a lot of benefit to. And but we did, just out of interest, go down the path you were going down. And we reached a very, very clear decision on that. The way that drugs, the ones that, all drugs, including the ones that are legitimate, like alcohol, as you rightly point out, all of them will stop being promoted if you cut the profit out of them, if you take the money away. I mean, it's so obvious, but it's a big step to do it, and you have to do a lot of remedial things if you do it. But let's say you just make it a law that the only people entitled to produce addictive drugs are the government. They'll produce all the marijuana you need. They'll produce all the opium, heroin, whatever, methamphetamines. And by the way, the biggest prescribed drug on the planet is a methamphetamine. It's, I can't think of the name.
I thought it was statins. Statins.
Ritalin is the drug.
Ritalin, yes.
It's a low-dose methamphetamine, which, is, as far as I know, has absolutely no side effects because it's a very low dose. You take too much of it and you wind up with the problems you were talking about.
Yeah.
But there you go. If we had the round things to simply supply all the drugs from the government and the revenue go to the people, and then use the revenue that you get to put remediation in place that gets people unaddicted and helps them with their problem, you'd take all the incentive away to promote the drugs. As far as I know, the government, unlike poker machines and things, doesn't get any tax off it.
Yeah.
And therefore, I can only conclude, and this was the conclusion of the group at the time, that there must be more influence by organised crime on government policy than we thought, because they're the only beneficiaries of it. Yeah.
And the strange thing is the organised crime has as its unwitting bedfellows the Festival of Light and all the do-gooders that feel that if they can just wave that magic legislative wand, they can purify society. Yeah. That's what they believed in the days of Prohibition. Yeah. And it doesn't work.
It was, I think, a very, very relevant reference. As you mentioned, Al Capone. The Prohibition caused a problem.
Yeah.
And, without the Prohibition, there'd have been a problem, but it wouldn't have generated the wealth that it did, and it would have created different, smaller problems.
And to think that it's only recently Sol's Pharmacy took the morphine out of their cough mixtures. Morphine hydrochloride was one of the ingredients.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember my mum telling me that when I was a kid.
And this is a matter of months ago, not years ago.
Yeah. Oh, well, they're on the right.
And I haven't heard of anyone becoming addicted to the cough mixture.
Look, am I allowed to promote a competitive TV station on your...
Yes, all right, yeah.
The ABC, Four Corners, on Monday is going to run an investigation or a report on the takeover of Bankwest by the Commonwealth Bank. And there's a Senate inquiry also heading off in that direction. It's one of the most important things that's ever happened in Australia financially.
Which was the other bank, Norwest?
Bankwest.
Bankwest, sorry, yeah.
Western Australia was, funnily enough, 100% foreign-owned bank. Halifax Bank of Scotland, HB,
Halifax,
bought 100% of it, and then Halifax got into trouble.
Yep.
Wayne Swan thought he'd do the right thing, and you couldn't argue with that. He said, we'll help the Commonwealth Bank be the only buyer and buy it back and get this Australian bank back again into Australian ownership. And they did. But there were some horrible things happened as a result of it, which I think Unhappy Banking is the group that's promoting this, and they've got that show together. I'm promoting it because I'm trying to get litigation against the bank for related things, and their logo has been the only difference between the banks and organised crime is that the banks are better organised.
Have you read the latest on Bank America? By Matt Taibbi, the one who did the big number on Goldman Sachs a while back with Rolling Stone. He's now done a number on the Bank of America, And it's so hot, I'm not going to read it on air. We'd be sued.
Look,
calls them everything under the sun.
Brian, I do. I know a lot about it. The work that we did on why Australia was in debt 15 years ago revealed more about the causes of the GFC than the President of the United States knows today.
Yeah.
The reason